My name is Dr. Emily Chase. For years, I've been the voice of reason, or so I believed. Crowded auditoriums awaited my speeches, my name headlined exposés against pharmaceutical moguls, and millions followed my every word online. I was the movement, fighting for holistic immunity, warning against synthetic manipulation of the human body. Vaccines, I told them, were the greatest act of deceit. Beneath my sharp heels and tailored blouses, I prided myself on being immovable, unshakable. Facts were my armor, logic my sword. The price of my crusade? Relationships, or rather, the lack thereof. My son Caleb called me brilliant, yet distant. I could accept that. Emotion rarely served a cause as noble as mine. Besides, he was 19, old enough to fend for himself. My life's work, however, couldn't wait. Mothers depended on me. Children depended on me. It started with a cough, a dry, nagging thing. Overwork, I told myself as I powered through a lecture. Sleepless nights were common. I thrived on the adrenaline of controversy. But then came the chills, the wheezing, and a pulsing weight in my chest. Despite Caleb's protests and my assistant's concerned glances, I dismissed it as either stress or proof of my resilience. Medicine, after all, was for the weak. I trusted herbal teas and intravenous vitamin infusions, not doctors. The night before my fall, I stood on stage with my usual vigour, but cracks had begun to form. My chest ached with every breath, forcing me to pause mid-sentence, though I spat out data with my signature authority. The hot stage lights blurred strangely. Once the debate was over, I staggered back to my hotel room and collapsed into a restless sleep, woke drenched in sweat, and ignored my reflection, a pale, gaunt stranger. The morning came, and with it, my stubbornness. I took the stage again, determined. The auditorium erupted into a frenzy as I rebuffed my opponent with a smirk, and then the floor met me. Darkness consumed my vision as shouts turned muffled, the buzz of panic rising. For the first time in my life, I felt powerless, imprisoned in my own body. Minutes later, I woke to flashing red lights, an oxygen mask in place. I drifted, my mind clawing for certainty. The one thing I couldn't admit, yet couldn't deny, crept in. This was only the beginning. The hospital ceiling blurred into focus above me, sterile and cold. My chest burned, each shallow breath scratching at a wall of resistance. I tried to move, but my body refused. Disorientation turned to panic, and the muffled sounds of monitors and voices felt suffocating. Then I heard it, a voice rising above the static, rough yet recognizable. "Mum, please." Caleb. My Caleb. Was he crying? Number he wasn't the type. I blinked against the haze, desperate to reach him, but my eyelids grew heavy, dragging me back under. The next time I awoke, a nurse hovered over me, her expression a mix of controlled calm and something else, pity. "Don't try to speak," she said, adjusting my oxygen mask. "You're stable now, but it was close." Close to what? My mind clawed for answers, but fragments of memory collided in chaos. The auditorium, falling, the gasps of the crowd, and then a void. Darkness. The doctor arrived with grim efficiency. "Dr. Chase," he began, "your respiratory failure was caused by an acute viral infection. It's rare and aggressive. We had to intubate." His voice faded into clinical jargon. Arterial blood gases, inflammatory markers, all things I once dismissed as scare tactics. "You coded on the table during surgery," he continued, his eyes narrowing. "We lost you, for 3 minutes. 3 minutes. The words lodged in my mind like a splinter. I should have argued, should have discredited their narrative, but my strength was gone, along with something deeper, harder to name. Certainty. I focused on Caleb, sitting silently by the window, his face pale and lined with fear. He noticed me watching and hesitated before speaking. "You almost didn't make it," he said, his voice cracking. "Do you even care?" The words struck like a lash. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out, his accusation hanging in the space between us. Later, alone in the fluorescent silence, I replayed the moment I collapsed. Somewhere deep, a question gnawed at me. Why had I survived? I wanted to dismiss it as coincidence, but something else lingered beneath. My fingers brushed the edges of the hospital sheet, trembling. I'd stared death in the face. What I couldn't comprehend was the echo it left behind, something I wasn't ready to admit. Something I couldn't ignore. White. Endless, enveloping white. It wasn't the sterile glow of hospital fluorescence, but something richer, warmer, alive. I hovered in a cocoon of silence, weightless and detached, as if the boundaries of my body had dissolved. Below me, the chaos of the operating room churned. A flurry of hands, machines beeping in frantic rhythm. I recognized my body lying there, pale and fragile, but it felt distant, merely a shell I no longer inhabited. And then I heard him. "Don't you dare leave me! Do you hear me?" Caleb's voice cracked, jagged with desperation. He was standing just outside the swirl of activity, his fists clenched, his body trembling. My son, my brilliant, distant son, was breaking before me. I reached for him instinctively, but my hands weren't hands. They were nothing and everything, intangible yet present. My yearning was visceral, yet I remained motionless, trapped in an invisible purgatory. The noise below dimmed as a new presence stirred behind me. A soft, radiant light emerged, expanding outward, pulling me with a tender magnetism. It wasn't blinding or oppressive. It was an invitation, warm and patient. I felt it without understanding, like sunlight seeping into frostbitten skin. The room fell away, my tether to the commotion snapping as the glow embraced me, humming with something I couldn't name. Peace, perhaps. Or truth. For the first time I felt fear, not of the light itself, but of its familiarity. A whisper rose within me, not in words, but in knowing. I had hidden from this my entire life. The certainty I'd clung to in my crusade, the sharp logic that armoured me, seemed brittle and laughably small in its presence. I wasn't ready, yet I couldn't resist. As I drifted closer, flashes of my life surged forward. Lectures, headlines, crowds roaring my name. But interwoven with them were shadows, images of Caleb turning away, his voice echoing. "Do you even care?" My breath, or whatever I possessed here, hitched. I teetered at the threshold, terrified and awestruck. All I'd built, all I'd fought for, suddenly felt distant and inconsequential. The light pulsed, patient but resolute, waiting for me to step through. The light expanded, swallowing me whole, and yet making me feel infinitesimally small. It wasn't blinding, but layered, rich with textures I couldn't name, as if sight and sound were intertwined. Colours shimmered, not in gradients, but as emotions made visible. Tranquil blues, vibrant golds, smoky greys that hinted at sorrow. The air, or whatever this was, carried a warmth that seeped into every piece of me that had once been fractured. But beneath the awe, a murmur of unease stirred. I didn't belong here. Not yet. "Emily." The voice, soft yet commanding, came from everywhere and nowhere. I turned, or thought I did, towards two figures emerging from the glow. They were indistinct yet familiar, their forms shifting like clouds caught in sunlight. One radiated steady warmth, the other carried a quiet gravity. "Who are you?" My question wasn't spoken. It emerged as pure thought, untethered by my body. "We are guides," the softer presence replied. "Emissaries of eternity, as you might call it. We've been waiting for you." "Waiting? For what?" "To show you," the others said in unison. And then I was moving, not by choice, but as if pulled gently through space. The whiteness around me broke open like a veil, and I fell into a rhythm of scenes, my life, fragmented and unforgiving. There I was, speaking to a roaring crowd, my words sharp with certainty. A mother clutched her daughter, their faces hopeful, placing faith in my crusade. Another flash, a boy trembling with fever in a darkened room, his pale hand gripping his mother's. The image lingered. I tried to look away, but I couldn't. "These are the echoes of your choices," the gravity-bound figure said, its voice heavy yet not unkind. "You've shaped lives, Emily, but not always for the reasons you believed." "I was trying to protect them," I shouted, though I had no mouth. "And yet," the other guide countered gently, "intent does not erase impact." I thrashed, desperate for something solid, but the weight of their words bound me as tightly as the hospital bed I'd left behind. Regret rose in me like a tide. "Stay," whispered the light. "No." Yet even as I fought, part of me wanted nothing more than to surrender. The light pulsed gently, and the guides stepped closer, their countenances still shifting, yet somehow familiar. Between them appeared a vast, shimmering book, its pages glowing as if inscribed with starlight. I felt an irresistible pull toward it, even though my instincts screamed to resist. "Emily," the softer guide began, its words coiling directly into my thoughts. "This is your life's ledger, every choice, every action, and their ripples." The book opened, pages unfurling into moving, living images, not memories, but truths seen from an unyielding vantage point. I saw myself commanding auditoriums, my voice roaring with authority. The crowds cheered, mothers clutching their children, hope in their uplifted faces. But the scene shifted, darkening. A child, gaunt and feverish, lay trembling while their mother wept. Another image followed, an elderly man alone in a sterile hospital room, scanning news articles bearing my face. The headlines declared me a saviour. He died clutching that belief. "No," I whispered, recoiling from the visions, yet they pressed on. A whirl of families torn apart by debates I had ignited, of lives lost through interpreted or distorted words I once wielded so carelessly. They believed in me. I only wanted to protect them. "Intent does not absolve impact," the weightier guide said, its tone as steady as a metronome. "Many you reached sought safety but found harm instead." "Not all," I countered. I reached for an image of a mother curing her child's rash with methods I had once championed. But the guide's form shifted, and my hand, or whatever I was now, came up empty. "I fought for justice. I armed them with truths no one else could bear to speak." "And who bore the cost of your crusade?" the softer guide asked, calm yet piercing. That question lingered, opening a deeper wound. Suddenly, Caleb appeared in the pages, younger, sitting alone at a dinner table, my chair empty. Another flash, him as a teenager, shouting while I stormed out mid-argument to catch a flight, and then the crowd's cheers dissolved into his desperate cry. "Do you even care?" I staggered back, overwhelmed. My crusade had consumed me, leaving others in its ruin. And now, the pages of my life seemed heavier than anything I could ever hope to amend. The light shifted, and the warmth dissolved. In an instant, I was plunged into darkness, thick, suffocating, endless. There was no floor beneath me, no sky above, just an oppressive void that coiled around me like a living thing. The silence was deafening, a stark contrast to the radiance I had just left behind. "Where am I?" My thought echoed, hollow and frantic. "This is not punishment, Emily." The gravity-bound guide's voice resonated from nowhere. "This is separation." "Separation from what?" I demanded, though the answer formed within me before the words could settle. Separation from purpose, connection, love. The emptiness shifted. Shapes emerged from the void, familiar outlines, hollow and shadowy like smoke caught in a breeze. Faces I thought I had forgotten stared back at me, blurred with grief, anger, despair. A fevered child, clutching her mother. A man pleading into the void of his loneliness. The lines between them shimmered, and then I saw more. My words, like arrows, piercing through families, dividing homes. Arguments lit up like wildfire. Headlines gleamed with my face, sharp and righteous. The truth about vaccines. Behind them, lives shattered. No, I whispered. My denial felt fragile, laughable in this all-encompassing gloom. This isn't my fault. They chose, they listened. I didn't cause this chaos. Didn't you? The softer guide intoned. No malice in its tone, only unbearable precision. The void churned, pulling me into its rhythm. I saw a gnarled mirror of my life, a stage, a crowd, my voice gleaming with certainty, fortified by facts I had chosen to trust above all else. Every argument I'd won, every opponent I'd crushed, now unravelled. The lines between truth and harm blurred, and I was left staring at the aftermath I had refused to see. Then Caleb appeared again. Not whole, but frayed, his silhouette filled with fractures. His words returned to me, relentless. Do you even care? I reached for his outline, desperate to close the space between us. The distance only widened. I didn't know. The void pressed harder around me. You did not want to know, the guide whispered. Something deeper cracked within me. My pride, my armour, my certainty, it couldn't hold here. For the first time, I ached, not to argue, not to fight, but to change. The darkness dissolved, replaced by a radiant golden warmth. I was weightless once more, yet something drew me, a presence, immense yet gentle, filling the infinite space. It didn't demand attention, it simply was. A knowing filled me, not like facts I could measure, but an undeniable truth that seeped into every fractured corner of my being. This was love. Pure, unfiltered love. I instinctively recoiled. Love? The word felt cloying, simplistic to a mind ruled by logic. But the presence remained, unyielding yet patient, as though waiting. The guides appeared again, flanking me like sentinels, their forms now resolute, no longer shifting. Between them, the book of my life returned, its pages brighter, their weight heavier. You stand at the reckoning, the heavier guide said, its voice deep as an ocean current. The pages turned, pausing on an image of myself, triumphant on stage. My fists clenched, my voice sharp as brittle steel, surrounded by the roaring praise of my followers, the rattling silence of my critics. The scene shifted, a woman in tears, cradling a lifeless child beneath headlines I had inspired. Then another. Caleb, his face etched with loneliness, staring at the door I had closed behind me. These choices, the softer guide murmured, were built from passion, but lacked love. My chest tightened, though I had no lungs. I believed I was doing good. The presence swelled, and with it came understanding. Belief without compassion is a blade that cuts indiscriminately. Images flickered faster now, the faces of those I'd harmed, those I'd touched. My triumphs felt hollow, my failures unbearable. Yet through the grief, another sensation rose. Hope. The presence didn't condemn me. Instead, it invited me to see myself fully and forgive. Emily, the guide said, its tone neither cold nor warm, but resolute. Do you wish to stay in the eternity of your making, or return to a world still fractured, with all its risks and possibilities? Stay. The word whispered sweet relief, an escape from pain. Yet Caleb's face appeared again, his fractured outline fading. Do you even care? Tears, the first I'd ever felt in this space, fell like light. I care, I whispered. Enough to try. The light embraced me, and then I fell. The first thing I became aware of was pain. Sharp, consuming, tethering me to a body I wasn't sure I wanted to return to. Then came the sound of beeping, mechanical and relentless, and the muffled hum of voices. My eyelids felt weighted, but I fought to lift them, my vision swimming until a shape came into focus. Caleb. His head was bowed, his shoulders trembling. Caleb. My voice was a rasp, barely audible. His head snapped up, eyes wide with disbelief. Whatever wall he'd built in my absence cracked, and something raw spilled out. He reached for my hand, gripping it as though I'd vanish again. "You're awake," he choked out, his voice breaking in a way I'd never heard before. My brilliant, stoic son, unravelling before me. "I'm here," I whispered, though the words felt delicate, insubstantial. "I'm here." Emotion flickered across his face, relief, anger, fear, all tangled. "They said you wouldn't make it," he snapped, his voice hoarse and full of accusation. "You were dead, Mum. They lost you." "I know," I said, tears pricking my eyes. Memories surged in fragments. The light, the guides, the terrifying vastness of what I'd seen. And Caleb, always Caleb, his voice cutting through the void. "Do you even care?" "I'm sorry," I said, my voice barely steady as tears rolled down my cheeks. For the first time, those words felt like more than surface platitudes. They bore the full weight of my past, absences, neglect, misplaced battles. "For everything." He stared, as if uncertain how to respond. "You—" His voice faltered, and then he shook his head. "Do you even get it? I almost lost you, and you—" "I do," I interrupted softly, my hand trembling as I squeezed his. "I do now." We sat in silence, the air between us heavy but not unbridgeable. For the first time, I didn't hide behind sharp defences or justifications. I let him see me as I was, weak, broken, human. "I'm going to fix this," I promised, though the enormity of that task loomed like an uncharted mountain. "I don't know how yet, but I'm going to try." Caleb exhaled shakily, his grip loosening, though he didn't let go. "Just don't leave again," he said quietly. "I won't," I vowed. And this time, I meant it. The morning sunlight filtered through the hospital blinds, soft and almost forgiving. The antiseptic sterility of the room, once oppressive, now felt grounding, an anchor to a reality I wasn't sure how to navigate. Caleb sat in the chair by the window, scrolling aimlessly on his phone. He didn't look at me, but his presence was enough. I tried to rise, but my body protested with sharp twinges. I had fought larger battles, at podiums, in debates, across countless online forums, but this was a new kind of war. My throat ached to speak, but none of the sharp rhetoric I'd once perfected could help me now. Words had always been my weapon. For the first time in my life, I had no desire to wield them. A knock broke the heavy quiet. A nurse entered, trailed by my attending physician. The nurse avoided my gaze, while the doctor's was steady, cool. "Dr. Chase," he began with deliberate precision. "Your recovery is nothing short of a miracle, but your prognosis remains delicate. I suggest you reconsider your stance on conventional medicine if you hope to avoid relapse." His tone held no accusation, yet my first instinct was to argue, to defend the principles that had once defined me. But those principles felt fragile now, their edges dulled by everything I'd seen and felt on the other side. The light, the void, the unfathomable truth that even my sharpest facts couldn't unravel. I nodded silently, a truce I never thought I'd offer. He raised a brow, perhaps expecting more, but when I said nothing, he left with the nurse. Caleb watched me, his expression inscrutable. "That's new," he muttered, his voice edged with lingering frustration. "I'm trying," I rasped, my voice an alien thing, hoarse and raw. Will you help me? He hesitated, then his face softened. Always, Mum. The weight of those words, the simplicity of that promise, loosened something in me I hadn't even realized was clenched. For years I'd been the voice people followed. Now I had to learn to listen. As Caleb squeezed my hand, I realized healing wasn't just about getting better. It would demand facing the chaos I had sown, slowly stitching it back together, one small truth at a time. The microphone felt foreign in my hand, its weight unnerving. For years I had commanded crowds effortlessly, wielding words like precision tools. Today, no armor, no certainty, protected me. The small podcast studio buzzed with quiet energy, producers gesturing behind the glass, my host offering reassuring nods. Across from me was Caleb. I thought of how hard he fought for this moment, for me to speak this truth aloud. The host began, her polite warmth thinly masking a skepticism I knew too well. Dr. Chase, you've been a polarizing figure for much of your career, but something changed. Can you describe what happened during those 3 minutes when your heart stopped? I closed my eyes, inhaling deeply. The words didn't come as easily as they once had. They were tangled in the memories, the light, its call, the ledger of my life. Caleb's fractured silhouette. I died, I said plainly, my voice smaller than I intended. In those moments, I saw my life, the good, the harm, all the ripples I created, and the love I withheld. The host leaned in, intrigued but cautious. The love you withheld? I met her eyes, steady now. I believed I was fighting for justice, for truth. But I built walls, around myself, my son, countless others. My battles alienated people who only wanted hope, not fear. I didn't realize how much harm I'd caused until I faced what I called separation. It's a darkness where connection, meaning, love, they don't exist. I wouldn't wish it on anyone. She hesitated for a moment and then asked, "And now?" I looked at Caleb, who watched me with a quiet mixture of pride and fear. Now I'm learning. I'm learning to listen, even when it's hard. To mend what's broken, even if it takes the rest of my life. I'm not here to attack or defend. I'm here to build bridges between science, faith, choice. Between people like you and people like the old me. The silence stretched. My pulse raced until the host's voice softened. Doctor? Chase? I think many people need to hear that. As the recording light dimmed, Caleb reached over, his hand squeezing mine. For the first time, I believed I was truly understood. The desk before me was bare except for a single sheet of paper and a pen. My hand trembled as I stared at the blank page, the weight of my journey pressing down. How do you condense a lifetime of conviction, missteps, and redemption into words? How do you tether threads of science, faith, and healing into a legacy you're no longer sure you deserve? Caleb sat across from me at the kitchen table, casually scrolling through his phone. He looked up, catching my hesitation, and gave me the same look he had the first time I told him I was trying. Equal parts skepticism and hope. It's just the start, he reminded me. I nodded, unsure if I could convey what I now knew. The system I once fought against wasn't flawless, but neither was I. Chasing truth meant nothing without love. I wasn't here to dismantle or defend anymore. I was here to listen, to learn, to heal. The thought of public scrutiny clawed at my resolve. Even now, I wasn't naive enough to believe my former followers would embrace my transformation, nor would the critics I once scorned welcome me with open arms. Yet each doubt faded as I remembered the light, the warmth that promised connection, not separation. And Caleb, always Caleb, the voice that pulled me back. I put pen to paper. Once you face eternity, the trivial fears dissipate. I wrote then of mistakes I once hid with arrogance, the lives I hurt in my certainty, the gaps in love where fear thrived. And I wrote of hope. Of a bridge not just between ideologies, but between hearts. By the time I finished, my chest felt light for the first time since waking. Caleb reached across the table, briefly squeezing my hand. He didn't have to say it. I saw it in his eyes. Love, patience, and something new. Respect. The battle wasn't over. Healing is slow, sometimes relentless. But I wasn't walking it alone anymore. Not with Caleb, not with the guides who had shown me truth, and not with the God who called me back to love. God will guide you, but I promise it's worth it. If my story has touched you, seek Jesus. Open your heart. He'll meet you where you are. Thank you for listening. Share your thoughts or prayers below, and check the videos on your screen for testimonies of faith, grace, and unending love.